Here's a dangerous paradox hiding in plain sight. Some of the most popular medieval survival tricks people admire today, tips about food, shelter, medicine, even cold weather endurance, are the very things that could kill you within days if you tried them now, and the mystery is why they ever worked at all. Imagine being stranded in the wilderness, remembering something you heard about medieval people drinking untreated water, eating questionable foods, or toughing out injuries without care, trusting that if it kept them alive back then, it must still work today. And yet history tells a more unsettling story, because medieval survival wasn't about what was safe. It was about what was available. And many practices only seemed effective because people didn't live long enough for the consequences to be recorded. And as we peel back the myths, we uncover a forgotten truth. Survival knowledge without context isn't wisdom, it's a trap. To understand these myths, you have to step into a medieval world shaped by scarcity, belief, and incomplete knowledge, where science as we know it didn't exist. Germs were invisible enemies, and cause and effect were guessed through tradition and faith, not experimentation. People survived, not because their methods were optimal, but because there were no alternatives. Drinking river water wasn't considered risky, it was unavoidable. Using herbal remedies was common, not because they always worked, but because nothing else was available. And when people died, which they often did, the deaths were blamed on fate, sin, or divine will rather than bad technique. And over time, the practices of those who survived long enough to teach others hardened into rules, passed down through stories, monasteries, and folk memory, stripped of the deadly failures that surrounded them, leaving us with myths polished by time but divorced from their brutal reality. Now, here's where the danger really reveals itself, because many medieval survival methods relied on conditions that no longer exist. Take water, for example. Medieval people sometimes drank straight from streams, but those waters flowed through sparsely populated landscapes with far fewer contaminants. Today, the same practice can introduce bacteria, parasites, or chemicals that overwhelm the body in days, or consider the myth of natural immunity. The idea that exposure builds strength, when in reality medieval populations simply accepted high mortality. Infections that killed quickly were rarely linked back to their source, and injuries treated with unsterilized tools often turned fatal. Slowly, weeks later, and even cold survival myths, like relying solely on fire or heavy clothing, ignore the medieval reliance on constant movement, communal shelter, and caloric intake far beyond what modern emergency situations provide. And the truth is uncomfortable. Many medieval techniques worked only because people lived short, hard lives, and failures weren't written down, only endured. And this is where history becomes practical again, because the real lesson isn't to copy medieval survival methods, but to understand why they existed and where they break down. Modern survival depends on filtration, sanitation, controlled nutrition, and medical awareness. Things medieval people desperately lacked, yet their mistakes teach us what not to do. Imagine preparing for emergencies today by filtering water instead of trusting appearance, treating injuries immediately rather than waiting, prioritizing shelter design over brute endurance, and questioning any advice that begins with "people used to do this," because context matters more than tradition. And ironically, the most valuable medieval lesson is humility. The understanding that humans once accepted death as normal, while modern survival aims to prevent it entirely. So, the medieval survival myths that could get you killed today aren't just outdated tips. They're warnings disguised as wisdom, reminders that survival knowledge must evolve alongside environment, population, and technology. And as modern crises push people to look backward for answers, we have to be careful not to romanticize a past where suffering was common and death was routine. Instead, the real power of history lies in learning why people struggled, what they misunderstood, and how far we've come. And if this journey through forgotten dangers changed how you think about survival advice, consider sharing it, subscribing, or continuing to explore the line between myth and reality. Because knowing what not to do can be just as life-saving as knowing what to do.